Hello and welcome to episode 363 of Retro Encounter, RPG fans' weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and here I have some apologies and mea culpas to make in this episode, but before we get to that rather depressing discussion, let's introduce the rest of the panel, starting with Joshua Lindquist.
Hi.
And also Pete Leavitt.
Hello, happy to be here.
We're here today to discuss Ogre Battle 64, Person of Lordly Caliber, a late 90s RPG for the Nintendo 64, which is unique in a lot of ways. This game has like an unlikely development team on an unlikely system in a somewhat unlikely series, but it has a very dedicated and passionate following that includes both of the two of you for certain. But I do have an apology to make at the beginning of the episode. I have had I don't want to go into specifically what they are, but a large number of significant personal challenges at the beginning of 2023, and I have barely played any video games, let alone the one I was planning to play for January, Ogre Battle 64. I've never played this game before. I have seen videos and read about it a little bit over the over the past, say, 20 years. And I was always curious about it, but never really dove into it. The only Ogre Battle games I've played are Tactics Ogre for its PSP remake several years ago. We did podcast episodes on that in, I think, 2020. And also, I did play Tactics Ogre Knight of Lotus on GBA many years ago in the mid 2010s. And I like both of those games a lot. But Ogre Battle 64 is very different. It is from the old Quest team, or the remainders of the Quest team after Yasunori Matsuno left sometime between 1995 and 1997. The people that made this game did not develop a huge number of high-profile games afterwards, but Ogre Battle 64 remains a very popular fan favorite, and where do I begin here? Josh, you, before joining RPG Fan, were the creator of an Ogre Battle 64 site. Is that correct?
Yes, I still actively maintain it. Yeah, still in development.
Oh yeah, I mean it's all a work in progress, because I mean no website is really a finished product, you could say. But the what's it called, and what's your experience with the Ogre Battle 64 community over the years?
Oh, I mean, so the website's just ogrebattle64.net. It doesn't have a fancy name. But my experience was I actually got this project started during COVID. I'd wanted to make it for a decade and had been in touch with. There are other people that had made Ogre Battle 64 sites and had talked to them for years, and then just been in a Discord community, and then just finally, had time on my hands and sat down. But I was dreaming about doing this in college and never got around to it.
But when was the first time you played Ogre Battle 64, and what were your early experiences with it?
So that was, I mean, it was essentially at launch. I didn't have it on launch day, but I probably, the game came out in 2000, so I probably had it by 2001 or earlier. And I just saw it in Nintendo Power. I had, I believe, played the Super Nintendo game just a little bit, probably the PlayStation re-release actually, but never had it. And so when I saw the 64 game in Nintendo Power, I was very excited to finally get a chance to have it, and I'm pretty sure it was a birthday gift or something from my parents. And I played it diligently for years after that.
Yeah, Ogre Battle 64, Person of Lordly Caliber, a July 1999 release in Japan, an October 2000 release in North America. I think this is very specific. I think the first time I read about it was maybe the GameSpot review in 2000, because that is right around when I started following GameSpot and a lot of RPG-centric fan sites. It was right when I was in 2000, when I was in sort of at the end of middle school or so. And I remember this game getting a lot of positive reviews, and I knew of the first Ogre Battle as that weird, rare Super Nintendo game that I rented once and definitely didn't understand. And that was my only Ogre Battle experience for a long time before trying an emulated version of Tactics Ogre in the 2000s, and then finally finishing it on the PSP much later. But the entire Ogre series has a very dedicated following, but Ogre Battle 64 being somewhat different from the others, I think even feels more like it's on its own island than even Night of Lotus does, and that game literally takes place on some Ogre Battle characters becoming castaways on a mysterious island. But Pete, same question to you. What were your early experiences with Ogre Battle 64, and how? Well, I should say, what's your relationship with it been over the years?
That's hilarious that you mentioned that GameSpot review, because that was a review that I always remembered after reading it. I was an avid GameSpot reader at that time and for many years, and I remember being so intrigued by that review because I owned a Nintendo 64, and that and the PC game reviews are the few things on that site that I could like relate to. I pretty much had a PC and an N64, and that was it. And I remember what they said about Ogre Battle 64 and being just so impressed and being amazed that a game like that could exist, especially on that system. And uh, I kind of didn't really think about it for over a decade until I, to be completely honest, tried it on an emulator, and then later I bought it on the Wii Virtual Console. And it is, like you said, it is really um, worthwhile to mention how unique this is in light of other tactics RPGs, other kind of strategy RPGs, its approach to battles, and also I think for the limited storage space on a Nintendo 64 cartridge, how much amazing dialogue they put in there and what they were able to achieve narrative wise on it. And but I just whenever I would come across it, you know, maybe seeing it on some ROM site back in the day or whatever, I would always remember that GameSpot review, and it always intrigued me. And I didn't play it until probably 2012, when I went in and got it for the Wii Virtual Console. I got a Wii at that point, and yeah, it's really inspired me ever since. It's a game that is unique in its approach to narrative. There are games that deal with the topics it deals with, but I think the way that Ogre Battle 64 deals with those topics is really slick, and it's really rather intelligent. And I love the battle system too.
Right. Going back to the GameSpot review, I remember it specifically because it was very positive, and you could tell that the reviewer enjoyed it. But also, it was a bit novel, as a GameSpot was started out as sort of a PC only reviews site that sort of became more console focused over the years. But this was an RPG on N64, which was already very uncommon, and then it was very positive and talk and praised the sophisticated narrative, which was maybe a little unexpected from this specific game, that from a series that was very charitably could be considered niche. But we've thrown around a lot of terms already that we are going to visit more specifically. This game was developed by Quest, published by Atlas in the United States. The first two Ogre Battle games, Ogre Battle March of the Black Queen, and then Tactics Ogre Let Us Cling Together for the Super Nintendo, but I think both of them had PS1 ports, were developed by the Quest team led by Yasunori Matsuno, who would go on to develop Final Fantasy Tactics, Vagrant Story, Final Fantasy XII, and other games with Square Enix. Matsuno and a lot of his core team left Quest when they were hired by Square in 1995 or 1996. So Ogre Battle 64 was developed by director Tatsuya Azayagi and designer Koji Takino, and others that were not considered the big names or auteurs that Matsuno is regarded with today. This was largely a team that was either new, were sort of lower on the food chain in Quest in the development of those two games, but were involved in those developed games. This game is a specific chapter in the larger Ogre saga, which, because I think each game even specifically mentions that it's a specific chapter within the Ogre saga or Ogre Battle saga. The GBA game Night of Lotus is specifically a guide end game about one of the major characters from Ogre Battle when he was young. But Ogre Battle 64, I don't know if I've mentioned this yet. I did make a sincere attempt to play this game over the last month. Right around New Year's is when I first tried to play it. But I was at first I was going to play it on my Wii Virtual Console copy that I did buy in, I don't know, pretty much right when it came out on the I think 2010 or 2011. Because I knew it was an uncommon game, and I never had an N64 to play it on. I was around when I was trying to upgrade my Super Nintendo into a new system. One machine had Final Fantasy, Street Fighter, and Mega Man, and the other machine had Zelda and a terrible port of Mega Man Legends. So my decision was made for me. But Ogre Battle 64 was one of those N64 games I was the most intrigued by, but never got to play over the years. So I have had a copy on my Wii for over a decade. But when I tried to play it, I really, really struggled understanding its control scheme on the on my Wii Pro controller. And I mean, I also have a lot of problems in general with the N64 controller, but that's maybe an entire separate podcast. But so I ultimately decided to go the ROM route as well. And a few weeks ago, like middle of January, I guess, I downloaded a ROM and N64 emulator. I won't say how. Use Google if you're that determined listener. But I also just struggled to get started with it. But this time it was for more personal reasons. I've had a very difficult January, as I mentioned before, with both personal and medical issues, and I haven't finished a single video game since the new year. And it's just because I've had difficulty playing anything, let alone a lengthy RPG that has, I should say, some really cool ideas, but some occasionally confusing execution. Does that sound fair, or am I just like outing myself as an N64 hater here?
No, not at all. It's
No,
totally
there's some.
fair. I mean, uh, a big, I guess we'll get into it soon, but a big part of the game is organizing your units and setting them in formations and everything. And the menu system to do that, specifically if you, I don't know, I guess are using a touchscreen through some method, it can be frustrating to navigate those menus, and it's not always clear which menu items take you to which parts to do exactly what you want to do. It takes some learning, it takes some patience. So yeah, you're totally fair to mention that, and it's a very fair, hang up for sure.
Yeah, like this might be a little more of like a positive spin on it, but like there was a comment earlier that the game's very big, and it is. It's one of the largest in 64 games. Uh, it's maybe a little over ambitious.
They had to use some kind of 32-bit expanded cartridge, and it was one of only two games that did that. So this is at least size-wise for a cartridge of the time, a large video game.
Right. No, it for sure, and it is. It's a little over ambitious in some of its menus and all the things you can do, and I don't know if it reflects on some inexperience from the developers or just the lack of buttons on the 64
There's
that they
probably the
felt they could
time too.
use. Right. But the menus are pretty clunky, right? If it were made today, it would be much more streamlined. Just no one would ever consider putting it together the way it is.
And you have to engage with the menus. Uh, if you're going to equip any of your units, any of your guys with a new sword or a new piece of armor, you need to go interact with the menus. And the thing about the menus also, they are powerful, and when you learn it, it's good because they're powerful. They let you do a lot of things. There's a lot of cool things you can do with formations in this game, and so you can see why they got to where they got to. Um, you know, but it is show it's a lack of streamlining. I think in a later era, like you said, Josh, it would be cleaned up a lot.
Yeah, it's a good example of an older game that really wants you to read the manual and really wants you to play
Yes.
the in-game tutorial.
And one useful thing on almost any menu, if you highlight an item and you press start, it will tell you what it is. So that's good to know.
Yeah,
That's a helpful tip.
like having a tooltip function was really welcome in this game, but this game does not very well communicate to you, the player, how to play it. The tutorial, they really want in time investment into the manual or tutorial. I did try the tutorial a little bit, but I mostly relied on reading and on doing some outside research into guides before going in, so I would have some idea of what to do. It's very clear that formations and unit diversity and balancing the different alignment of different characters is important, but the game, I don't think it does a great job of explaining its own systems to you. And I did not have access to a copy of the manual, but I think that maybe this game tries a lot and under explains itself, but that's maybe a function of it being a 1999 RPG and less of and less of how good the game actually is. But whenever I was reading about this game, like there was the community and the guides written for it and everything had a lot of enthusiasm and passion that you could not deny at all. But there was also a tone of like people almost apologizing for the game as they were explaining it to you in a way that made me think like, oh, this game is good and its fans are very dedicated, but they also are very aware of how sort of how it's a little opaque at times.
I'll say, if I can swing it a little more to the other side, I guess, from there, really good points that I think we've all made. If you are like I tend to be and you're not much of a min-maxer, this game is kind of a dream, because what all these systems, like you mentioned, we can get into some of these things, but how alignment interacts with your unit level and the power of your unit, and what that means for liberating or taking control of towns on the maps, and how that affects certain things and potentially even the story, which characters you can recruit and so on. If you're not trying to min-max this game and trying to understand every little system, because it is obfuscated, there's very little the game shows you, and it's hard to find like, oh, how chaotic or lawful is this unit. So like it's kind of not the easiest thing to find that information. But if you don't, and you kind of let things play out naturally, all these systems mix together into a pretty organic feeling thing that I kind of, especially on this playthrough, because I'm trying to play through it kind of quickly, so I'm not as careful as I have been in the past. And certain outcomes that just happen, I feel good with rolling with, and it feels real. It feels more grounded, and it feels like almost, maybe not, obviously not realistic, but believable in a way.
Yeah, I agree. Like I feel like we look at it, especially when you're writing guides, right? And it's like, well, this is really complicated and difficult to understand. But I think they did it that way intentionally because they just wanted you to play the game, right? And not try to min max it and figure it all out necessarily. Because there are multiple story paths, a whole bunch of different dialogue based on what you do, multiple endings. And I think they wanted you to just play it and see how it went. And then maybe on a repeat playthrough, you can bother with all the specifics. But without a guide in front of you, like you don't know that X character was even recruitable in the first place, right?
Or you might not even know, like, hey, why did my alignment go down after this battle, after this
Right.
encounter? Like, it might not always be obvious. Why did this character in my same unit, why did his alignment go up, but her alignment went down? Like, that's not always obvious, but it leads to cool kind of naturalistic outcomes sometimes.
Right.
Yes. So this game is bad at explaining how to play itself, and that's a good thing. Yeah, I'm sure. I completely disagree with both of you. First of all, I am not. I do not appreciate the accusation that I was trying to mid-max and over-research this game. That's not how I was approaching it at all. I was just trying to figure out how to play it without using a menu. And because I realized very quickly that going in blind and trying to just experience it for myself was not going to work, because the controls on the Wii were, I think, pretty bad, and I had a lot of difficulty doing basic things like menus and formations, and I knew there was an alignment system, but the game did a poor job of telling me what the alignments meant or what it would do, and not necessarily because I was going after specific outcomes or trying to min max anything, but because I didn't know what any of it meant. And maybe this speaks to how I play video games, but when I play them, I like to have an idea of what I'm capable of and what the game's systems are, so I can play them how I want to. Sometimes that does mean min-maxing or exploit or playing in an exploitative manner. Sometimes that is going in a little bit more organically and just making decisions as I feel like I want to make them. But sometimes I want to role play a character a certain way, and if I don't have an idea of how alignments work, then I will fail at my own attempt to role play. Like I think it is, I think that it is facile, and I think that defending a game saying, but actually this bad thing is actually a good thing is just trying to justify your own enjoyment when there isn't a reasonable defense for it. This game has issues with communicating its systems and menus and some of the fundamentals of how to play it that made it that made it feel like I was already going into something that I needed to read a manual for to
Well,
before went into play it, and I'm not going to defend that as a good thing.
well, I think your points are well taken. Like we said, those are real issues, and I think we kind of all agree on that. And we're not accusing you of min maxing or anything. I just simply brought that up because in RP, and it's something that I do as well. And with this very game, I've tried it before too. With RPGs, most of them, I think, lean toward encouraging min maxing. I just think it's interesting that the approach seems to be for this game to not as much. But yeah, the real issues, they're real. You're right. We don't mean to discount like how bad the game is at communicating things or how difficult the menus are to navigate. Those are real issues that, if people are wanting to check it out, they should know about going in. It's product of it being an older game. Also, I think you mentioned perhaps the inexperience of the developers. Um, uh, my whole point was just saying, um, getting over some of those issues and not understanding everything perfectly, I think for a certain kind of player can still lead to an interesting thing. But that's totally fair. Like it should communicate what things mean. So you, especially like I like what you said, because you might want to role play a certain character a certain way. That's a very, very fair point. And with this game, it can be a little confusing to be able to achieve, that kind of role playing. That's totally true.
Yeah, and I would add that since we've been talking about alignment, alignment probably is, I think, near anyone that plays this game repeatedly for sure, probably the most confusing, most difficult to manage part of the entire game. Uh,
Yes.
even with a guide, it's just a lot of times you just kind of accept how it turns out, or you go to extreme lengths, like item duplication glitches to manipulate it. um, like I can tell you, I wanted a unit in a playthrough last year. I wanted a unit to go chaotic. This is a lawful chaotic alignment scale. I literally spent hours grinding to get that character from one end to the other, and most people would have just said, "Forget it. Don't waste your time." I just wanted to see if I could do it right.
The thing is, I didn't care about alignment when I was figuring out how to play this game. But when I was looking up basic information on how to play this game, a lot of the discussion went straight into alignment. And that just made it, and because that is something that some fans of the game try to manipulate. It's like, because the game does have a lawful route, a chaotic route, and a neutral route, speaking in generalities. And there is a single continuum morality system or karma system or whatever you want to call that goes from chaotic to neutral to lawful. That system is called chaos frame, which are two words that I would love to never see put together for the rest of my entire life. But how chaos frame is calculated is no one seems to quite understand it, and the principles of how to gain more points towards lawful or towards chaotic are making sure that your different units of characters are filled with mostly lawful or mostly chaotic units. And when you capture a town, if the town's morale is high, you should liberate it with a lawful unit. If the town's morale is low, you should probably capture it with a chaotic unit. And if you get any sort of the switch is wrong or on those operations, then your chaos frame will perhaps go in the direction you don't want it to go. And even if you play this game pretty cold or pretty blind and just making decisions based on how you want to make them, and you're not thinking about chaos frame or alignment, which is a perfectly fine way to play the game, you probably don't have any way of knowing that your team composition will affect these things. And even like if I were to go into this game blind, and I was trying not to, I was trying to have some understanding of how the system worked before playing it, but intending to make decisions personally and not with a specific outcome in mind. I think that it would have been a hindrance or frustrating not to realize that my unit composition had built-in alignment choices that I was making. Like I think this game like wants to do some very interesting things, like have an alignment system that with that has ending changes and has unit composition affect alignment. Like all of that is cool, but it is not really well communicated, and a lot of players think it's really important. Like even if you're extolling the virtues of playing this organically, the a lot of the community is hyper fixated on chaos frame.
Right. And part of that, I think you mentioned that the fans are really, really passionate about the game, right? The guides do
Yes,
tend to just ooze that.
this game is practically the platonic ideal of a cult following RPG, I would say.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. Uh, Part of the problem we've run into is that because things have not been understood very well, uh, and people have been excited for 20 years, a lot of the guides are wrong and or contradict each other. So you can see where even someone 20 years ago had it right or mostly right, but then other people said no, that's not right, and had kind of built a consensus around something else, and now we've had to kind of go back and say, well, maybe the other way was better. And so we are like the community does still research this stuff, trying to figure out exactly how it works, but you had the basics right. So it's kind of like the reading a bunch of guides or any guides, honestly, almost confuses it more, uh, because the basics is you want the alignment of your unit to match the morale of the town, and if you do that, then your reputation, your chaos, which is chaos frame is just a stupid word for reputation. Your reputation increases, and if you have it mix matched, your reputation decreases. But your reputation is invisible.
Uh, I can. So I'm not in the Ogre Battle 64 community. Um, I spent very little time reading guides and really investing myself in understanding all of the very, very minute and obscure systems of the game. Um, so I don't know if I can represent some kind of, maybe a little bit closer to the average person who might listen to us and might be interested in playing this game. Maybe they heard about it a bunch. Um, but that the specific issue of matching your alignment with the towns is something that I like, and I like how. I mean, we really should back up and probably talk about the setting of the game, the plot of the game, and how it plays. But one thing, maybe by way of segueing into that, if there's not something else you guys want to add, like I think um, what this game represents, what it's about. It's about an uprising. It's about a civil uprising in a very kind of 30 years war setting where you have different religions tied to different um, political apparatuses fighting each other. You have some that are subservient to others, and you have a revolution. And what I like is that is reflected both in the gameplay with the alignment system and the fact that every town has its own kind of its own leanings, and that could, I mean, it's an abstract way, I think, to represent the culture of the people in the town or the city or the stronghold, right? And it's also reflected that way, but also in the narrative, the difficulty of bringing together a unified movement for revolution, for social change, um, uh, yeah, like a political revolution. And the fact that when you do that, you're involving many people with many different beliefs and people who have different experiences. And so how the in my view, as someone who hasn't spent a lot of time reading guides, is not really in the Ogre Battle 64 community at all, the fact that the game tries to represent that through gameplay, I really like. Yes, it should communicate it better. It should be more upfront. You can dig in. There's guides inside the game itself. You can dig in to explain that. But I think it's really cool how what are we trying to do here? Well, we're trying to unify a populace. We're trying to convince people who with different experiences than other people who are involved in this revolution to join up. And what that means is, representing their interests. And when you represent their interests in the game, that could be the game has abstracted that reality into, oh, well, look, we have people with us who are like you and they have the same interests you do. And I think that that's kind of a cool narrative part that's represented through the gameplay itself.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that it only took us 30 minutes for Pete to go into a diatribe on the revolution narrative of Ogre Battle 64. You in fact wrote a feature on RPG Fan about that very topic in 3 years ago in 2020. But yes, this game does try to communicate the messiness of a revolution and how an event as transformative as political upheaval does not affect an entire block of people the same way. That they are trying to represent that, and that is interesting. But I think that to give this a lot of deep mechanics and to have these mechanics thrust upon the player, but explain them very poorly, I can't think of that as a positive, not at all. So like I was starting to feel overwhelmed about what this game was doing before I even started playing it, and then navigating the menus was such a challenge that this game was frustrating to even begin, and me like having struggling to be able to enjoy any video game this month made it a little bit harder. But I do recommend that anyone interested in the narrative of Ogre Battle 64 check out Pete's feature. But let's go back a little bit instead of talking about the big picture storyline without saying the name of any character or place or thing. The Ogre Battle 64 starts out in some cutscenes. You're young nobleman named Magnus Gallant, who is a graduate of a esteemed military academy, and you're a sort of a low level officer in the Palatinus military. But then civil war erupts suddenly. You decide to side with the leader of the revolutionary group, and then you sort of begin liberating parts of Palatinus, and then you start to interact with people from both sides, as well as a very large group that shows up in past Ogre Battle games, the Holy Lotus Empire and the Dark Hordes. The game starts from being not very supernatural to extremely supernatural by the end, which I guess is also a feature of Final Fantasy Tactics, which is Ogre Battle's cousin. But Josh, starting with you, what are your overall thoughts about this game's story, especially in the early goings on, and how important, and also maybe how rewarding is it to have played the older Ogre games ahead of this one?
Oh, like I had very little experience with the previous games. I had never played Tactics Ogre before I played this. I'm not even sure I knew it existed. But and the Super Nintendo game has it doesn't have any actual cutscenes or extended dialogue sequences at all. So it's very difficult to piece that story together unless you like play it multiple times, um, or read supplemental material. Uh, so like I don't really think you need any prior knowledge. The like there are connected pieces, right? Even just the word Ogre Battle, right? That's backstory that really goes from the Super Nintendo game. Um, and there are some recurring characters that it's cool if you recognize them, but if you don't know who they are, they're just more characters.
Okay, so it's not deeply referential to the past games. Like I know that these are all very specific chapters within the arching saga. I mean, it does sort of the Star Wars thing where where the first Star Wars movie was Episode 4, so it give you the feeling of it beginning in meteor res, and having the and being a smaller chapter within a larger story before there was more story. So I think I trust you. Like, this is, I don't. It's not crucial to play other games in this series, but there are references and there is the feeling of a larger setting. That
Right, there is, like, comparing it to Star Wars, right? If we the original trilogy of Star Wars follows Luke's story, the Ogre Battle saga does not follow the story of a single character. It follows the story of, like, a world, but one game is focused on a specific country, and then this game is
yeah.
focused on a different country, and you kind of have Lotus as the maybe overarching big bad guy in the background uh, across the series. But other than that, it's just very separate conflicts.
March of the Black Queen is a game I started like 20 times, and for one reason or another couldn't get very far in, and I played through this game twice. I would say it's not necessary to have played the earlier one, and I haven't played I haven't finished or gotten very far in any of the Tactics Ogre games either.
I mean, I said this already. I have played Knight of Lotus and Tactics Ogre Let Us Cling Together. I rented Ogre Battle for the Super Nintendo once or twice, but didn't really understand it. But it is the all time or one of the all time favorite games of one of my close friends. So he's been bugging me to try and play it for this podcast. In fact, for I don't know, 4 or 5 years at least. But I didn't really, I just didn't know the specific connections between past games, and I didn't know if there was any that were particularly meaningful. Is why I asked. I figured this game stood alone, was standalone in its own right, but I didn't know how deep the connections went. Uh, but Magnus, our hero, again, because I have not played very far into this. What are some early moments in the story, or maybe an early decision that you make that you find particularly interesting or impactful? Whoever wants to go first.
I can jump in. There's the personal rivalry with Dio, and Dio tries to pick a fight with you right at the very beginning that you can choose to indulge in or take the high ground on. Um, Magnus very early on is appointed the leader of his little squad, and Dio's like, why, like why him and not me? Dio's kind of a hothead, and so at the very beginning, probably the first couple of chapters, he's like a personal rival to Magnus, and you can choose. There's a decision you can make with him or not to, I guess, choose to fall into a fight with him.
Yeah, and, like, following up on that decision, uh, you mentioned that you choose to join the revolution, but at the beginning of the game, you're not part of the revolution, right? You get to see all the build up to that, and there is a pivotal moment where you get to choose whether you're going to say that you get to choose to refuse to kill the leader of the revolution or to sit in silence and say nothing. Um, I mean, it actually is an actual pivotal moment in the story that makes a difference. And So that one sticks out to me as, like, the main moment of the first chapter of the game.
And just to, I guess, drop more names, you have your superiors, who are General Godeslas, who's like right above you. He's the leader of the Southern Division, which is the division you're in. And then there's Raid, which is like, what a name, Raid with an H after the R. What is Raid, Josh? Again, what is he exactly?
He's a knight of the Central Division, which is, like, the main capital of the country.
Right, they're the prestigious ones because they have the capital. That's right.
So those are your kind of two main villains right at the beginning of the game. Uh,
Raid's the one who's just like bugging you so bad to kill Frederick, the leader of the Revolutionary Army, and he's always on your case. He's always skeptical. He's got a crazy temper, so it's pretty obvious how his bread is buttered as soon as you meet him. Godeslas is a bit more of a pathetic figure, but he's pretty interesting too. He's also an evil guy, but
Yeah, he's easy to manipulate, kind of just desperate for a promotion kind of character. Will do anything to get ahead, but is actually uh, a weakling.
And of course, Hugo. Hugo is like your tactician and like advisor, and he is. I know he is from the first game. He's like was a wizard that can be on your
Not
team.
quite actually.
Oh no!
Nope. In the first game, there's another tactician slash wizard named Warren, who actually reappears in Tactics Ogre.
Sure.
Uh,
Warren, that's right.
Yeah, Warren's important in Tactics Ogre. And the Warren report is even the sort of codex you use in Tactics Ogre to keep track of what exactly what's going on.
Much
right.
like the Hugo report
Right.
from Ogre Battle 64. Yeah, they try to throw in these codexes to try to keep you abreast because there are a lot of proper nouns, a lot of places, a lot of names, and especially because you begin in the middle of the story, like you said, Mike. Like it is nice that they have those in there to kind of keep who's who straight.
Yeah, I have a feeling that Matsuno and then his successors within Quest really liked having a lot of lore puzzle pieces to place everywhere because I mean that a similar codex is in Final Fantasy Tactics for the two full wars that take place before the war you're actually in.
Yeah.
so yeah, this game does like give you the feeling of a lot of political machinations taking place and a larger story, sort of the world being larger than the story you just happen to be playing. There's a lot to digest, and depending on just how you feel about abundance of lore, that could be a great thing or a bad thing. Like my sister wrote reviews for an entertainment magazine for several years, and one time she made a comment that recent movies have a tendency to include about 80% too much backstory, and I like not necessarily with Ogre Battle 64, but like I look at the codices of even a game that I love that I played recently, say Mass Effect 2. It's like this game's great. I love this video game, but they're giving me 80% too much backstory.
Too many codices for me in Mass Effect, and probably for in Ogre Battle as well. And Ogre Battle, I tend to try to just interpret and understand what's told to me to my face. It doesn't always go well, but I try.
Yeah, like I actually agree, right? It was like I would even say several playthroughs, many years before I really felt like I understood the story because there's so much like background and lore in there, right? And like you don't need all of it, but it feels overwhelming that it's there and you don't have it.
Yeah, this is not a complaint specific to Ogre Battle 64. If anything, I know more about or I'm more affected by other games and films and stuff that do this. I struggle to enjoy a lot of Marvel Cinematic Universe movies of the 2020s because like some of them expect you to have seen every other movie and multiple TV shows before going into this new one. It's like I understand the value of something feeling like it's part of a bigger whole, but I also don't like the idea that I'm supposed to do homework before I can understand something. I will never finish I will never finish Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce because I know that to properly understand Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, you probably have to take a class on Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. That is an extreme example, but like when too much of the game is not in the text and is in something like a codex or supplementary materials, like my first question is why. Like it's good that Ogre Battle 64 is a standalone game that can be enjoyed on its own merit and you don't have to play previous games to enjoy it. That is good, but I also wish this game had just a little bit less backstory, a little bit less that was buried in the codices. But I also feel that way about almost every RPG. So this is not a specific complaint to Ogre Battle. I mean, I was right at the end of 2022. I finished one of the Trails video games, and playing that made me want to like play three other Trails video games, but also made me wish that the larger Trails series was less than 12 video games because I think that's where they are in Japan right now. Rant over, but sometimes I find a codex overwhelming and more of a detriment than a positive.
Well, it is an RPG problem, and what I think Ogre Battle does kind of deftly is it illustrates the Russian nesting doll nature of the setting. How you have, it's not always successful in making it very clear, but I think it's fairly successful in making it clear. Like you have uh, superior to everyone, you have the Holy Lotus Empire, and then subordinate to that, you have Palatinus, which has its own traditional religion, traditionally practiced within it. But Lotusism, the religion of the Holy Lotus Empire, was they tried to impose it upon them, and so then that forms the basis of the class system. Also, Lotus was using it for Palatinus for its natural resources and implementing unfair labor practices. And so then you have the hierarchy of Palatinus, which is subordinate to Lotus, but below them you have their people who are frustrated and trying to rise up. And so really the story focuses there for the first half, and in the second half you incorporate more of the Holy Lotus Empire getting involved, and you get more of a bigger picture. um, but I think if you do ignore the codices, like I said, I did have to look them up today to get some of the names right. You have certain kind of people groups within certain nations, and it's not always easy to keep it straight. But for the most part, in broad strokes, I think just what's told to your face in the game, you can kind of parse out. And like we mentioned before, it's really well done for an N64 game. Um, it's a very serious story. There's yeah, kind of a lot of text, but it's pretty economical as well. It's pretty clear. It's well translated, um, at least to the point of being easy to understand. So yeah, you can really enjoy the plot for what it is. I think for the most part, maybe a dip here or there into the codex, might be a little bit too daunting. I know that's never a good thing, but overall, I think they did okay here.
Yeah, I think that while the game is very focused on the problems of the local people and the revolution itself, and just the different divisions, which are just like the states, like Palatinus has 4 states essentially, and then like as long as they're focused on the political conflict, it's very easy to follow what's happening. When they throw in the supernatural portion of it, then they have a bunch of made up words, right? And
Absolutely.
things that you feel like you're missing something if you don't read a little more into it.
Yeah, I mean, I've played and finished 2 of the Tactics Ogre games, and they all end in summoning angels and liches, and a sneaky witch named Deneb that seems to be in all of these games, and a lot of monsters and class changing between different monsters. I mean, liches and angels are 2 very specific supernatural classes that are always among the most powerful in these games. But like it escalates from local revolution to global conflict to supernatural conflict, or at least the ogre games all seem to follow that path, speaking in a very very broad strokes. But this game does it at least pretty well, and I mean, we've been complaining about codices and how parts of this plot are confusing, but it is reasonable enough to follow if you don't think about it too much. But I say this as someone who is accused of overthinking everything.
Yeah, like no, you can follow the story, the basic story. Like I said, like I feel like the some of the supernatural ideas get a little difficult to understand. And there is, you can do a deep dive into backstory lore if you really want to. Like, I mean, Magnus's hair is blue, and that is significant, right? But that doesn't matter to the main story. Um,
And one bit of supplemental reading I do find really welcome is when you liberate a town and you visit it, and there's a very short interaction between your squad and like a person in town. And I find a lot of those kind of 1 or 2 sentence little quips by the people in town, which you can take as representing the general feeling of the populace, to be sometimes pretty profound. And sometimes they're silly, and sometimes they're just like, what are you doing here, we hate you, or hey, cool, you're here, we love you. But um they're all different. For every town there's a completely different dialogue, or monologue, I suppose, and they're worth seeking out. They provide some kind of insight, and like I said, the game covers all these layers pretty well, and even down to like almost the individual level, or at least like the general group level of individual towns.
Right. That like there is a lot of world building in visiting the towns, but it's a lot of effort to go get it, right? And actually, if you visit during the mission, like right after you've taken it, you'll get a different message than if you come back afterward, just investigating the area later.
I
Uh,
didn't
and
know
it's
that.
and in some cases, like there's side quests that you pick up after the missions, or even like if you send a specific character somewhere else, they'll meet someone they know, right? And a lot of that again is not well explained. That's just but there is a lot of world building in there where you kind of get the feel of what the people think about while you're fighting and what they're thinking when you come back later.
And I didn't know you can. I knew you can go back to the areas, but I did not know that you could potentially get different interactions in towns. And so that's another thing where it's like, it's cool that it's there, and if you happen across it, it could be like a great surprise. Um, but I love this game, and I didn't know that. So potentially, if you didn't know that, you could still get a lot of enjoyment out of the game, even without understanding a system like that.
Yeah, that's another thing that like a modern game would just have never have had that problem, right? They wouldn't hide invisible side quests in missions you already completed. They'd put a big exclamation point pointing at it saying go here.
Yeah, for sure.
And you see, I'm of two minds about that because I think that Ubisoft games where you have to where with maps that are incredibly busy with notifications and indicators, and by completing some side quests, they show you more side quests, and you get to view more of the map, and then the game becomes a game of map checklist completion. I find that awful a lot of the time, but also if when side quests are so hidden that they're easy to miss, that and maybe they would have been valuable or are interesting but have very specific unlock conditions that are never communicated. I find that frustrating for another reason, because it feels like the game is hiding itself from me when I want to engage with it. That's not a problem only with Ogre Battle 64. I mean, I feel the same way about even recently some things inside of FromSoft games. Yeah, I mean that goes back to the thing that I find the signature thing about Ogre Battle 64. Like, this is a good video game that hides too much from the player, and it has a communication issue. Even if when there is a tutorial and usable tooltips, I mean, I feel like this game maybe needs a modern remake to just to fix some of those things, because it seems like a doable adjustment in a full remake. But this game is already pretty sizable, and so it's not like you can open up a breaker and flip a switch that says "make game good" to solve all these problems. I know that a lot more effort than you think goes into these big budget remakes that Square Enix has put out recently, and other groups as well. But I think this is a good game with a communication issue, and but frankly, I don't know. I've had personal struggles the last couple months, but I also had a hard time getting into this game because of some of those early frustrations.
I can imagine that. I mean, I haven't had a great year myself either. So, and I've like had periods of like, man, I just cannot get into whatever it is that I would normally get into, um, or things that other people are interested in that I might want to check out, but I just can't get into it. I can totally understand that. And I'll tell you one thing: I would not say no. I would definitely welcome a nice remake, because of the Ogre series, this is, I mean, people know about it. Obviously, there's a huge, very, well, very passionate community, but it is kind of, I think, from my perspective. I could be wrong, but I think it's one of the lesser talked about ones next to March of the Black Queen, the Tactics Ogres games, especially now that Tactics Ogre remake just came out. But
For sure.
I would correct you and say that Tactics Ogre is the one that is talked about, and all the other ones are the ones less talked about.
probably, yeah, probably so. But I mean, I will say the game does play when you're in the battles. The way the battles work, I think that's pretty awesome. I think I do like the battle system a lot.
I was going to say that's like a strength of the game, right? We keep talking, we keep going back to all the negative points and the communication issues and the menus and so on. But it's sort of like you end up with like a super fan like me who wants to dig into every bit of it, uh, because the base gameplay was fun in the first place. Like, so it's like if you just put away all the rest of it and just play the game too, that's what made me just want to keep on playing it 20 years later. And I've had 20 years to figure out all the details. And that, I mean, yeah, that's not good game design. It shouldn't require that. But the base game is fun. The battle system is really cool, and I think still basically unique. And just playing the missions is fun. And if you take out all the rest of the game, you still have fun playing the game just with that.
Yeah, and we probably haven't talked about it enough. This game balances real-time strategy elements. Well, let's take a further step back. You have um, individual soldiers that have skills and classes and a lot of ways to customize them as individuals, and then you organize them into units with and sort of each unit being sort of a mini party of characters with a designated leader, and you sort of set unit strategies for when they engage in battle with enemy units. Then you organize the units in a sort of real time strategy system that gives you the the sort of macro gameplay of a full battlefield, but then the micro gameplay of customizing each individual's class and setup and everything. And when a unit clashes with another unit, it sort of does maybe a hard cut is wrong, but it sort of hard cuts to a party versus party turn-based battle that you can set strategies for to determine their outcome. So like when once you know how to play the game and you have the pieces assembled and ready to shuffle around the map, it is pretty fun. But I think that this game has a lot of just ultra specific things about it that I wish were communicated better. I'm being a broken record here, but this is, I mean, it's my genuine reaction.
Yeah, I actually was flipping through the instruction manual a little bit while we've been talking, and there's a lot of information in the manual. It really, like, this is not the only game like this, right? Especially from the '90s, where they just kind of assumed you would have the manual and that you would read it, even if most people never did. It really does feel like they expected you to have it. I mean, it's like 40 or plus pages. The manual is, and so I think that's part of it. And you might even argue that it's already like one of the biggest N64 cartridges. Maybe there just literally wasn't space to put this information in the game anymore, and they prioritized the game details over the how to play it, which was maybe a bad decision in hindsight.
Well, it gave N64 folks a really cool RPG. I mean, God bless them for going for it. It's
Bringing the total number of RPGs on the N64 to 3,
yeah,
or maybe a very generous
There's
5 or 6.
yeah, yeah, something
there's
like
more
that.
than people realize, but yeah, it's
Yeah,
How many hands do I need to count all of them? I think
just your
only
two
one.
hands. I I think there's more than five.
yeah. But cool game. I mean, the battles are just so fun. I love how it has all the terrain traits that you'd expect, like in a Fire Emblem or something, where the forests do one thing and mountains do another and plains do another, and roads you can travel faster on them, because since it's real time does matter, and your units fatigue and they have to camp when they max out their fatigue. So there's a little tiny bit of logistics in there. It's a reasonably sophisticated yet simplified and easy to understand, like you said, Mike, as soon as you have the pieces all together, a real-time strategy game. And the way different units have different walking speeds over different terrain based on the class, and how some units fly and can ignore terrain. Um, the way facing works, how you can flank a unit and hit expose different soldiers inside the unit. The way that if you lose a battle, you get pushed back a while, by a lot, and how that can affect movement, and how you can corner units and just like pound them into a pulp, like in certain scenarios. It's a reasonably sophisticated and really satisfying strategy system for sure.
Isn't the strategy every time to tell your units to focus on the enemy leader?
A lot of the time, yeah, to be honest, and then mop up after, just to grind for levels and alignment. Yeah, that's a fair tactic. There would be scenarios where you might want to take the heat off the leader, though. If maybe there's an exposed healer that's not the leader, maybe you want to try to go for maybe the weakest, hoping that healer would be interpreted as the weakest unit or the weakest character in the squad. Especially when you get to higher level healer units that can heal multiple soldiers at a time and heal for more HP and things like that. But yeah, I mean, hitting the leader is definitely an important thing, and which is why you want to protect your own leader, and sometimes the computer controlled units can set up their formations in a way that protect the leader, and it can be pretty hard to get to them.
Yeah, I would say that especially I would basically tell every new player starting out to mostly use attack the leader, because it gives you quicker control over the battlefield, since leaderless units will run away from you. Um, but when you start learning the game a little more, I find that I switch my strategy frequently now. Sometimes it's not optimal to go for the leader, because of healers, or maybe there's even just a powerful magic user or something in the unit, and you're going to take a lot more damage if you don't focus on someone else.
Yeah, you could be focusing on a leader, and there could be two dragons that can like hit your whole party for like 50 HP and cause status effects on them, and you're like just plinking away at the leader and getting worked at the same time, and you won't have a chance.
Optimal strategies sound like you two are just a couple of min-maxers trying to extract everything you can out of this game.
Well, you
That's
know me.
interesting.
My last name is Minmax, so
Yep. All right. Well, okay. If we're trying to out min-max the other, this is definitely the end point for this podcast. Thanks so much, Josh and Pete, for putting up with my somewhat challenged, somewhat frustrated self. That didn't play fairly didn't play this game as much as I wanted to before recording this. I almost just decided to not record any episodes for Retro Encounter in February, but ultimately decided I wanted to keep the weekly schedule up. So here we are talking about Ogre Battle 64, a game that might be a good candidate for some form of remake in the future. But speaking of which, the topic came up in previous Retro Encounter episodes about remakes that we most want to see. So we're doing that episode next month. In March, we're the first two episodes of March are going to be about farming video games. Which is a topic that I don't know a lot about, but a lot of people on RPG Fan are very passionate on, and also the remakes or remastered RPGs we most want to see in the future. So those will be the first two episodes in March. But we're still in February here. Next week we're doing another episode on Ogre Battle 64, Person of Lordly Caliber. I'll probably try to play a little bit more of the game and see some videos that can allow me to talk about the game story a little bit more cogently. So please look forward to that next week. And for the last two episodes in February, we have John O'Logan and Mike Salbato and others talking about Star Tropics 1 and 2, a pair of NES RPGs or borderline RPGs, RPG adjacent games that did a lot of very fascinating design choices for the time. So the next couple of weeks, we have more Ogre Battle, then Star Tropics, then more Star Tropics, then in some order, video games about farms and video games you want to see remade. So please look forward to those coming later in Retro Encounter. But Retro Encounter is not the only podcast we have here on RPG Fan. There's also Random Encounter every 2 weeks about randomness, and Rhythm Encounter every other 2 weeks about RPG music. You can review Random Encounter, Rhythm Encounter, and Retro Encounter on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you choose to listen to your podcasts. And if you want to give us feedback as a podcast, there's the email retro@rpgfan.com. And RPG Fan also has presences on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Discord, YouTube, Twitch, something going on one or all of those every single day. I should mention the latest addition to the RPG Fan family is rpgfan.com/shop, where you can purchase RPG Fan merch such as t-shirts, coffee mugs, phone cases, and a number of other things emblazoned with the RPG Fan Emerald Shield. But if you want to reach out to us as individuals and not as a solo podcast or a large website, how do you do that? Let's start with you, Pete.
You can yell at me at Twitch at RG Halfpenny, or I guess I'm not on Twitter much these days, but if you reach out to me on Twitter, I'll see it. That is Pete Barbero 1, as in the number 1 at the end.
And now, Josh, your turn.
Yeah, I'm taking a little bit of a social media break, but if you want to follow me for when I come back, I'm Watcher Joshua on Twitter and Tumblr.
Excellent. And listeners, if you want to find me, the easiest way is probably Twitter. I am still chained to that hell site like a prisoner. I am at The Real Monsoon most of the time, at Evoker for Dogs at other times, and on RPG Fans Discord, I am Monsoon Mike. So I don't think I've conducted myself in the most lordly manner in this podcast, but I think that maybe next week, with some more perspective and some more research, we can get to the bottom of what's going on in this underworld vague question mark.
Well, Mike, you cracked the code. My interpretation of the game is that it says that lords suck. So you're good, man.
All right. Well, thank you. Good night and good luck.